Welcome back to the Elite Performance Podcast. This is episode 19, and today our guest is Brett Bartholomew. Brett is a strength and conditioning coach, author, consultant, and founder of the performance coaching and consulting company Bartholomew Strength. Brett just recently put out a book called Conscious Coaching, and today we talk about the why and many of the principles within that book. I highly encourage all listeners to go on Amazon and pick up that book. Again, Conscious Coaching, as it is a Amazon bestseller and number one in the sports coaching category, and it's actually in the top 100 of overall books on Amazon. It has been taking the strength and conditioning community by storm with a lot of positive reviews of it. So any coach, please go pick up that book. You will not be disappointed. I also want to remind you guys before we connect with Brett that our Elite Performance Clinic is coming up on Saturday, April 1st. We really hope if you're in the Midwest area, if you could come out, see you guys to attend this great day of learning, continued education, connecting, networking with various coaches, practitioners, scientists in the strength and conditioning field. Again, for more information, go onto our website and go onto the Elite Performance Clinic tab to sign up or to see our lineup. We will also be recording all presentations, so hopefully we'll have some DVDs or files that you guys can purchase afterwards if you cannot attend. So, without further ado, let's get to Brett. Welcome back to the Elite Performance Podcast. Today, we have Brett Bartholomew on the podcast. Brett, how you doing?
Tired, but good. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you taking the time. I know you're traveling a lot, presenting clinics, and most importantly, is the launch of your new book, Conscious Coaching. So talk to us about the book, how it began, and kind of your why behind the book.
Yeah, the why behind the book, I'm going to save the spoiler because there's a part of the book in chapter 2 that talks about the specific why and what went on in my life that basically showed me in a very unique and upfront way how knowledge is not dependent on, knowing X's and O's or having great technology or having great resources. It's understanding people and what drives them and not from a motivation standpoint, but just how to communicate, connect, and know kind of elements of human nature and what goes into behavior change and the psychological components of that. So for me, it started because, as I got into the world of performance and I got into it relatively young in terms of being able to work with elite special forces, professional athletes, things like that, I was put in a unique situation where I got exposure to those things early. I was faced with the fact that my knowledge of program design, technical, tactical pieces, all of that weren't going to be the main things that drove people to come train with me in exclusivity. I had to understand how to connect with people, how to get Navy SEALs, Marines, pro football players, elite fighters from the UFC, all those things to not only trust that I was reliable and solid resource for their training and to trust that, but also that I could communicate in a way that resonated with them as opposed to just regurgitating a bunch of technical jargon. Absolutely. So I think you see that a lot in our field right now. You see too much data and not enough communication. You see too much sports science and not enough engagement. You don't see people that know how to bridge the art and the science. And more importantly, you don't have people that understand there's a science to the art.
Absolutely. So you touched upon it a little bit. So what can coaches expect to take away or, learn from your book?
Yeah, the science behind the art of coaching, which is essentially the art of connecting and communication, what goes into engagement, what goes into trust, what goes into perception, cognitive bias, what goes into conflict, what goes into conflict management, all those things, not warm, wishy-washy leadership, call somebody by their first name, shake their hand and set a good example. We get into a lot of the dark aspects of leadership, how employing different parts of your personality, even if they're traits of psychopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism, manipulation, all those things, how those can be used in an altruistic fashion to get people on the same page, because humans by and large are led by their egos and their bias, and you have to understand that and learn how to beat them and play at their own game. Now, the only difference is as a coach, you're trying to do that for a positive outcome, whereas if you were somebody that was kind of a snake oil salesman, you're trying to do that to weasel them out of money or resources.
So you just touched upon a little bit about, coaching types or personalities and how coaches can pull from their own unique personalities and types. So how will knowing this about a coach, about themselves, help them with their athletes or coaching environment?
Well, by and large, every athlete that we deal with is a reflection of some aspect of ourselves, right? Like athlete, non-athlete, computer designer, engineer, stockbroker, we're all human beings. We all have evolutionary traits of behavior that guide us. We all have tendencies where we react and act upon emotions and again, bias and behavior and the way that we reason and perceive things. And so, understanding aspects of others and understanding aspects of yourself harken back to Sun Tzu, the author of The Art of War's doctrine that know thyself, know thy enemy, million battles fought, million battles won. And so, by being more in touch with your own kind of aspects of as a communicator, as a leader, as a coach, why you perceive things a certain way, understanding why athletes, whether they're from Dubuque, Iowa, or East St. Louis or Miami-Dade County, might perceive things a different way, allows you to communicate more effectively. It gives you a different cognitive lens and perceptual kind of roadmap for you to be able to frame things up that we care about as human performance coaches, but by and large, they may not give a shit about. And you've got to connect the dots with them to help them understand why training at 85% of their one rep max or above and addressing the neuromuscular system qualities that can enhance speed, power, explosiveness, all those, how those correlate into a faster 40 times, a stronger kind of choke if you're dealing with a mixed martial arts athlete, striking power, all these kinds of things, right? Like, so connecting a world that they care about with the world that we understand.
So let's say you're a coach at whether it be a private facility or a team. How do you go about figuring out the personality types of all these athletes? And you might have 10 different athletes with 10 different personality types and 10 different ways to connect with them. So how are you going to learn about these athletes? Are you doing an assessment? Are you doing some kind of evaluation? How do coaches better learn those aspects of their athletes?
The same way you learn how to communicate with family members, a significant other, your friends. It's done over time. It's done with micro interactions. There's no Dr. Phil moments where you're just putting your arm around somebody and talking to them for 15, 20 minutes. It's the interactions you have between sets, between training sessions, behind the scenes in practice, any of those kinds of things. So the book goes over these things in tremendous detail. That's why it's partially a 300-page book. But the biggest thing is understanding that we have a compass that kind of guides our interaction, and the compass is aspects of social intelligence, aspects of going into what's really behind the psychology of trust and how that's built. Knowing how to display patience, because you're going to have to give people time. These athletes aren't just going to, no matter how credentialed you are, no matter how well-spoken you are, no matter how knowledgeable you are, they're not just going to innately trust you. That's not how these things happen, right? And then understanding just elements of what goes into these interactions. And so I think social intelligence, social fluidity is the ability to say, okay, with athletes of these personality types and how we identify that. So to answer that question, I'll use everything from Google Forms, right? I may ask athletes, what drives you to compete? What drives you in your sport? What learning style best describes you? Who was your favorite coach in the past, regardless of sport, and why? How did they communicate with you? Athletes will tell you how they want to be coached. They'll tell you through all. It's kind of like when people. I had a neighbor one time that was an FBI criminal profiler. Then you could always look through micro expressions at how people, if they were lying and what they thought of certain things. How did they display anger versus disgust? And so the way athletes respond to different cues, different interactions, different questions, all lead you down this path, no different than jump profile testing and eccentric utilization ratio will tell you whether they need more elastic reactive work or max strength work. So you have to be able to navigate these social hierarchies and dichotomies and environments to be able to see how they react in a multitude of situations, whether it's failure, success, discomfort. And it's information that's accrued over time and basically put into this personality profile, so to speak.
Excellent. That's awesome. And it seems that coaches, this might be, general or broad, tend to fall on two ends of the spectrum. One being the kind of dictator or boss type of coach that, is the coach, but they don't have much of a connection with the athlete. But then the other end, you might have the coach that's more of the buddy, more seeks that friendship, but may lack the ability to keep athletes accountable and disciplined. So where's the real magic on that spectrum? And what do you seek to provide for your athletes on those ends?
Yeah, that's a good question. The real magic depends on you, right? Like there's a reason John Wooden has, won all those national titles when he was alive. There's a reason Bobby Knight was a very successful coach. So there's no perfect idea. There's no perfect balance. What there is what's authentic to you, because authenticity, in my opinion, far outweighs empathy, right? And so you have to be authentic to your communication, your leadership approach. That's why, whatever you've experienced in your path should guide your communication style. And you shouldn't try to mimic others, and so it's just kind of like when people say, hey, what's the best way to train? What's the best exercise? What's this? The best of anything in this world is done in the gray area. And that speaks to the importance of getting your hands dirty and stop, quit looking for absolutes, because anybody that searches for absolutes, by default is not truly displaying intelligence, because there's no absolutes in a world in which, we don't live by rules. We live by social rules and social norms and what have you. But by and large, the universe isn't going to, paint us into a black and white scenario. So if you look at continuing to play by that game, you're going to find yourself in some pretty hard situations.
Yes.
Personally and professionally.
And it looked like in the book, I'm about halfway through, you took some coaches and you let them tell a little bit about their stories, some experiences they went through. Talk about how you went about finding coaches that give them their voice and some, stories of their experiences.
Yeah, so the why behind that was first social, from a social and just kind of I would just say a cultural standpoint, strength and conditioning has gotten into this very troll-like tendency of these guys are great, this guy doesn't know his shit, this guy's a sellout, this guy, is this really smart guy who shouldn't, doesn't share enough. We're a very kind of conflict-oriented community right now. So it was important to me to bring 15 other coaches in worldwide from every sport, from the NFL, American football to rugby. You look at, or AFL, look at David Joyce, men and women. You look at Jennifer Noyles. You have coaches from every culture, every background, every sport. We have Barry Solon, from the soccer world. And so the main thing is I know that people, but there's going to be some people out there that could give two shits about what I have to say. There's going to be other people that want to hear what I have to say. And there's going to be some people that want to argue that this stuff can't be objectively measured or pinpointed, which of course isn't true. There's more research behind engagement and communication by far than there is physiological aspects of training or testing, right? So to bring 15 other people in from around the world in different backgrounds and share their story kind of speaks to the ubiquitous nature that we all face of getting athletes to buy in and do things that we need them to do in order for any of our performance interventions to matter at any kind of level. So these are all guys that I've worked with in the past. I maybe have got along with, or maybe didn't get along with at first, but now get along with really well. It has to do with people that have overcome very unique, almost Machiavellian type cultures and personalities that they've had to work with or deal with. And their stories are incredibly powerful and guide coaches of all ages and experience levels.
Awesome. Kind of a personal question for me. I've always been interested in, how's that environment that, down in back when you're in Arizona with EXOS and all of this there. I mean, that just seemed like I wish could be a fly in the wall for half of those poolside chats. But talk about that dynamic and kind of, getting maybe out of your comfort field into the track and field world with Stu and Dan and those guys.
Yeah, so Stu and Dan were just, Altus works out of the EXOS kind of headquarters there in Phoenix. And so my first interaction with Stu and Dan was just kind of passive. I'd be coaching my NFL guys, and they'd kind of be standing and watching in between groups, or they'd be coaching their track and field guys. And so there was this kind of, I would say, just cross-pollination of stuff they did. They saw stuff I did. They didn't really say shit to me at first. And then eventually, Stu broke the ice and was just like, listen, seems to me that you at least, you know your shit. It's good. It's rare. It's few and far between. Dan, I had tremendous respect for, along with Stu. So I went up and just, did what I think any younger strength coach should do, is pay homage and tell them how much you respect what they're doing. And I've always resonated with probably people in their generation more so than ours. I think our generation's a bunch of fucking know-it-alls and people that are sitting there pounding their chest when by and large, a lot of them haven't done much. Where Stu and Dan's generation learned through the school of hard knocks. And so they kind of see these trends come and go. and they know how to filter those things out. So we connected on that level. Where I fit in there is, even though I'm only 31, I was put in a very unique situation within my time at API and the team setting, where I was immersed in really dense and diverse situations where either due to a lack of support staff or just by necessity of how fast they grew, there were a lot of times where they needed, a coach that would work with, hey, we got to send you to a military base this day, or we have 15 wounded warriors coming in that day. Now we need you to go teach, Chukyo University. You got to go work with 30 non-English speaking Japanese students. And so, every other day or every other week or every other month, depending on the time of year, you'd be put in these really kind of dense and diverse situations where you had to figure these things out. So all it meant is I failed a lot earlier than most people had failed. I learned a lot more than most people had learned in that kind of situation, and that credit goes to API and EXOS, because they had the faith to put a young coach in there, and you had to learn trial by fire. So it's one thing where, now most coaches learn by the amount of blogs that they read or articles they've regurgitated, but they haven't really been on the field or on the floor much. I was kind of the opposite. I did my due diligence with learning the research, but also was blessed and fortunate enough that I was put in these situations where you're coaching and you had to deal with these situations far before you're ready. And that led itself to a lot of reflection. It led itself to a lot of kind of just, removal of your bias, because you may say, machine-based training shit. Next thing you know, you're working with a double amputee where you need to do some machine-based training. You may say, dumbbell snatches are kind of worthless exercise. They don't have the force output that a traditional snatch or even a clean pull would have. Next thing you know, you're at a military base where you have some med balls, kettlebells, and dumbbells. So I think that people get caught up trying to just say what's best, what's this, what's that, as opposed to what's effective. And I was blessed to kind of learn that early. And Dan and Stu, I think, saw that, recognized that, and welcomed that. And then it was my honor that, I just kind of felt like I had this responsibility to honor them and give back to them any way that I could, which led to me speaking for Altus quite a bit. And then the relationship just grew organically from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it seems sometimes some coaches, they want to get stuck and say, I'm a football guy, or like you said, I'm an Olympic lifting guy. One thing I tell our interns all the time is, like, in our gym, 1 hour you have a group of high school kids, and it could be college kids, and it could be 8-year-olds, and it could be adults. Like you talked about, just that wide variety of clientele population with, past injury histories or, training experiences. That's what makes great coaches, just being in the trenches, dealing with those. You get thrown into the fire and you learn by making mistakes, right?
Yeah, it's a difference between experience and exposure. Exposure means that you're observing an influencing event, or kind of, you're seeing it. Experience is interacting with it, engaging with it firsthand, kind of, whether that's directing, whether that's managing, all those kinds of things. And by and large, we have a problem in our field right now where a lot of people have exposure, but not a whole lot of experience. So it lends itself to a lot of know-it-alls and absolutists and kind of ego.
Yep. So, you've talked about communication a lot already today. Communication is vital for any coach or organization. So what are some strategies coaches can use to make their communication more effective when working with athletes? Specifically the high school, college age athlete.
Yeah, so there's a whole chapter on, like, what I call trust tenets and their things to this point. So everything from as simple as, understanding how to give ground to gain ground, and not always, trying to be this Superman persona, militant type leader, like understanding how and when to show vulnerability, when to provide and award autonomy to the athlete and allow them to kind of, through choice architecture, have a say in what they're doing. Like, you might have an athlete that, due to disc or spinal herniation, may not be able to squat. So you give them different opportunities. Okay, well, you can trap bar deadlift, you can belt squat, you can do things like that, as opposed to us always trying to be the ones that are telling them exactly what to do. There's a time and place for that, but you have to understand the fluidity behind it. There's a lot of the power and the science behind speaking in analogy and metaphor. Excuse me, battling a little bit of an illness here. So aside of, we always try to motivate or communicate through information. Information is a very, very, very poor motivator. If information was a good motivator, people that would have seen those don't smoke campaigns when it talked about how much it increased the risk of cancer and what it does to your lungs, everybody would have quit smoking. It didn't, because as Chip and Dan Heath talked to, that may address the rational end of the spectrum, but not the emotional end. And the emotional end of kind of our personality and our perception and our bias is ultimately what kind of drives behavior. So being able to speak in metaphor, analogy, contrast, comparing, all those kinds of things speak to what athletes understand already or can frame, or what they can anchor and what they can relate to is a powerful, powerful tool for any coach or communicator. And that even goes back to evolutionary behavior of why cavemen, used to draw pictures, right, to explain things, or why they used to use stories to explain things. Because, sitting there and telling somebody in a no-nonsense format, hey, this is why this happens, as opposed to telling a story about, an elder in the tribe who once, went out and did this and then found this. It's how Pixar develops their story arcs. Once upon a time, blank. Until one day, blank. Because of that, blank. It's how people learn. It's how people get taken on this kind of journey, and it's ultimately what frames how they see the world. So no different than how we address movement deficiencies. We have to be able to assess, paint a picture, guide, lead, direct, and understand when to kind of give them the power, as opposed to always being able to kind of be the one up front and in charge leading it. So autonomy, speaking through metaphors, displaying vulnerability, all those are just 3 such examples. The book gives at least 25 more, and why those are important from a psychosocial and literature standpoint within the book.
Yeah, I think we get caught up all the time, and it's obviously strength and conditioning. We get caught up in the physical aspect, but we forget sometimes the mental, emotional, social drives as well the athletes have with you as a coach, or just with you in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, we're strength and conditioning coaches, but we address the strength and conditioning, but not so much the coaching. And really, more importantly, we're human performance coaches. We're performance coaches. And, there's a psychosocial, a physiological, and a cultural domain that goes into high-level performance. And I think people just I think that there's an element to data, numbers, recipes that make people feel very safe. And people, by and large, in their emotions are chaotic, random, unpredictable. And so people like to hide behind this idea of, well, that's not sexy. You can't measure the art of coaching. And again, you can. That's the argument made throughout the book. There's a reason Google Analytics, Google's an analytics company. They know what ads you clicked on, why, what time of day, from what country, what drove that engagement. Coca-Cola knows where to spend their money for a 30-second Super Bowl commercial. These people aren't just throwing stuff at a wall and hoping that it sticks, right? Everything that we do as human beings is driven, directed. It's just whether we admit that or not.
So let's talk about the communication before practice, or you call it like the pre-brief. So why is this time so important? And what are some things coaches can do during this time period to make the subsequent training, practice, game, whatever it may be, more effective?
Yeah, what you're trying to do is establish relevance. So you're trying to create an anchor and a framing effect for people. They need to know what's the point of the training session. Excuse me. What are they about to take part in, and how does it help them? So by understanding that skeleton of, okay, I'm going to have, 20, 30, 40, 100 people looking at me about to go through a heavy squat session. There's going to be maybe a third of that room, if not less, that actually really like lifting weights and like heavy squats. The rest of them just want to be better athletes. Okay, what does a better athlete mean to them? What does it look like to them? How can I address my communication style and what's coming up in the training in a way that they understand how it makes them a better athlete, right? So my NFL athletes are not driven by, hey guys, you got to get stronger. Well, all right, they're already in the NFL, right? They already did their 225 bench press test. But if I speak to the concept of durability, ACL injuries, hamstring injuries, and how proper strength training and all these kinds of things can help manage the risk. I'm not going to say they reduce. I'm not going to say they prevent, but they certainly help manage and address the risk of those things occurring. Okay, now that there's an emotional tie-in. If I show people, hey, lateral lunge, and in my program I put a picture of a lateral lunge, and right next to it I put a guy's ACL like twisting and getting excuse me. If a guy, tearing his ACL, all of a sudden they understand, oh shit, this can help with that, right? Like, so it's understanding, hey guys, this is what we're working on today. This is why it matters. This is how it affects your game. This is how it affects something that you care about. This is how it addresses these concerns. Any questions? Boom, they raise their hand. Hey, coach, why are we doing this? Why that? Why do I have to get under this heavy weight? Then you can explain all those things. But don't sit there and meddle in minutia at the beginning. You're going to lose half the crowd. You get 7 seconds to make a first impression, right? You have to be very persuasive within those 7 seconds or less. And that's down from, I think, 12 seconds in the year 2000. So ego, insecurity, bias, attention span, all those things are super, super influential when addressing the team or a group. And that's why enigmatic leaders are able to move, right? Move large groups of individuals. They address the rational side, the emotional side. They set the path, and you understand how to move forth together. So that's what you're trying to do in the pre-brief.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something I think athletes miss too, is that they get into a weight room or any kind of program and they don't really know the why behind it. You're connecting the pieces. That's an awesome piece there. So let's go to the other end of the spectrum here, the debrief. So what should coaches be focusing on following training or practice at the end?
Yeah, I just think it's a reflection of that same thing. You have to tie it back in, right? So you're assuming just because it's that old kind of myth of tappers and listeners, right? I can tap the beat to a song. Do you have any idea what song that was I just tapped? No, you have no idea, right? Like it could even be happy birthday, so which it was, right? But if you have no idea, so like I'm assuming just because I've communicated that you've understood. You're not teaching until the athlete understands it. So a pre-brief is an anchor, a frame. You're trying to help them understand the world as you're trying to craft it and how it matters to them. They go through it, they experience it, they've been exposed to it, and then you bring it back in and say, okay, now do we see how X, Y, and Z tie together? Any questions on this? Why did that happen? Why did we choose that exercise? How did that? You have to give them ownership. You have to help them understand. They have to become an architect of their own destiny and understand all the ingredients. Otherwise, you're no more than you're a baker. You're not a chef. You're a painter. You're not an artist. You have to teach them how to paint, or at least how to bring those things to life or put them in color in their mind's eye.
Now, if you want to share a story or whatnot, talk about when you have maybe an athlete that is just confrontational, or you can't connect with, or you have trouble, breaking through that wall in terms of whatever it may be, whatever their challenges are, why they're not just believing or buying into your system. What are some things coaches can do in that situation where we're going to get an athlete that just doesn't buy into what you're talking about, or you just cannot connect with them? What's your next steps?
Yeah, so there's a lot of steps in that. I'm going to speak in a bit of generalities here. Otherwise, people won't have much of a reason to read the book. But the first thing you have to do is reflect. You have to look back at what's something that you're perhaps doing that is making you an ineffective communicator. Because I think it's ingrained in us. Like if a guy doesn't buy in, we think something's wrong with him. What's his issue? Why isn't he paying attention to that? And a lot of times it's how you communicate it, whether verbally, non-verbally, anything like that. More often than not, you're the problem. And I think there's taking ownership of that and people being truly reflective. Whenever I get that question in a crowd, hey, what do you do if this happens? And I usually turn it back on them. I go, what have you done so far? Well, I've tried this. Okay, well, what's at the root of that strategy? I just need them to do it, right? We try to force these athletes to do something. So we'll tell them to do something. They won't do it. We'll tell them to do it again, maybe just a bit louder. They won't do it. And then we just do it louder. It's this control piece. So you have to reflect on what maybe you're not doing effectively. You have to reframe, right? Kind of what did I try to say? How did he perceive it? How can I kind of alter that? And sometimes that just may be like, listen, I probably didn't communicate the best way. I know that you don't care about this. This is what I am trying to get you to care about, and this is why it matters to you. And then you've got to progress that. And so, I think internalizing, 90% of our conflict has to do with conflict with ourselves. We haven't identified our own communication strategy and how to be more effective. So I think a lot of it's reflection oriented. I think a lot of it is patience. We expect our athletes just to buy in. We think that I'm smart, I've studied this stuff. They're here. They should be listening to me. No, the athlete, you're only an expert when the athlete invites you into their life. And that's something that Roy Sugarman talks about. And he's one of the most brilliant researchers in the cognitive domain from Australia. Or he's from South Africa. I'm sorry, he lives in Australia. But you're only an expert when the athlete invites you in. You think just because you're telling them information that's going to change behavior. We already went over why that's not the case. Context is king. Context is king. Context is king. So I think if 99% of coaches just went through and they focused on reflection and improving their context, they'd get those two things along with patience, they'd get a lot farther with athletes trying to get to buy-in.
Yes. All right, we'll finish up here with the last 3 questions, Brett. So what's something you're doing this year, besides you're finishing up your book, that it's different than you've done in years past? Would it be training, coaching, whatever it may be?
Opening my own facility. How about that one?
How's that going?
My wife and I are moving to Atlanta, Georgia on the 29th of this month, which is March, with you and I talking to do that. So it's time to go my own route. We had a lot of opportunities in the team side, which is awesome. Like, I consult on the team side, love the team side. Like, the goal is to always honor and help those kinds of guys because they deal with tons of, it's funny, like a lot of people feel like the head strength coach of the Dallas Cowboys may have the best job in the world. Those guys face so many challenges. And like, everybody in the private sector should just be focused on trying to help them. And that's what I want to do. I want to try to create a no-nonsense training environment that's more focused on coach development and education, or is at least focused on those things as it is training. So we'll start that journey within the next 4 to 6 months. I'm going to be putting a lot of the content from the book online to help develop more coaches, because I don't think coaches need another voice in terms of X's and O's, how to get people stronger, faster. I'll still always address those things, and I speak on them year-round. But coaches need help with the communication and the presence and the teaching standpoint. That's something I'm very much passionate about. So I want to take the book and put that content online. This is the first time I've been able to do that, because working with other organizations, by default, they get control of my intellectual property. So it's really exciting being able to do that on our own. And then, listen, putting this book out in general was something different, because that required 3 years of reflection, inspection, progression on my own part. And I think a lot of coaches might look back and say, what did I do good this year? What did I do bad? But I put that into 300 pages. And so I think the combination of owning my own facility, putting information out there to help coaches, and trying to be the guide, the leader, the mentor that I never really had from a direct standpoint is something I'm really passionate about. On the non-sexy side, what I'm going to try to do this year is take better care of myself and be a better husband, because those things took a backseat to a degree while I was trying to get this content out. I came out to Unbreakable in LA, did everything I could to get this place going, tried to be a better leader. I'd stay up till 2 a.m. sometimes writing the book. There were times where, my wife and I didn't see each other for 4 or 5 days because I'd be on the road. I'd come back, get right into the coaching grind. Having a better personal life will make you a better professional, whereas being a better professional will not make you better in your personal life. And I'm very big on eating your own cooking and practicing what you preach. And so, that's going to be a big part that I continue to emphasize this year, and being better, being selfish for my family, knowing when to say is enough, knowing when I probably don't need to take that next speaking engagement, knowing when I don't probably need to train that next athlete. Like, I'm a bit like we love Tom Hardy's show Taboo. Have you ever watched Taboo?
I haven't, no.
So I don't ever compare myself to people in the field. I don't think any of us should. We all have different athletes, different lives, what have you. And I just think it's a poor frame. But it's funny. Tom Hardy's acting is really unique. And so I was researching him, and he's kind of this guy that when he gets a role, man, does he pour his heart into that role, right? Like, you look at Bane and Batman, you look at Taboo, you look at his role in The Revenant, but then he kind of just disappears. And that's kind of like how I relate to it at times. Like, I put this book out there. I'm going to be visible to a point because I want to help coaches, but I'm also pretty reclusive. And in a bit here, I'm ready to disappear. I'll still be involved in Instagram and stuff like that, but don't expect to see me as one of those guys that's constantly out there just ringing the bell. I've had to do that for the promotion of this book because I self-published it. It's not a sexy topic, so I'm going to do what I have to do. But at the end of the day, my business should not be about me. It should be about the art of coaching and the science of coaching and creating a movement. So I'm going to fade to black here to a degree here pretty soon.
Yeah, it's needed. Have you read the book Essentialism?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great book. Yeah, on that topic, so give us 3 books that have changed or impacted the way you coach greatly.
48 Laws of Power, by far number 1, by Robert Greene. I would say How to Win Friends and Influence People is always huge. And then The Upside to Your Dark Side.
Another great one. Nice.
Yeah, and I present on a lot of those constructs right now. Basically, how traits of psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism can make you a better coach. It's probably the number one talk that I'm giving right now, because it's empowering to coaches to know that they don't have to be this one standard or ideal type coach. Like, it's just about being your real self and authentic and understanding how to adapt those volume knobs based on the athletes that you're working with, the situations you find yourself in.
How about this? You can have dinner with any 3 people that ever lived, dead or alive. Who are you bringing to dinner with you?
So that's Benjamin Franklin, no question, because you talk about somebody who's one of the wisest people around, but also very socially and emotionally effective. Incredibly so. Napoleon, one of the greatest military leaders of all time, just from a strategy standpoint. I would love to just sit there and listen to the guy. I mean, of course, it would just all be about him, which is fine, but I would just love to know how he saw the battlefield. Because the way he saw things, if you study it compared to how everybody that he faced saw the battlefield, even if he was outmanned, outgunned, anything like that, was something else. And then I would say, like, a true craftsman, I would love to sit there and probably talk to like a Dr. Dre, right? Somebody that you look at, somebody that not only created a movement as part of NWA, but was so true and authentic to what he did with kind of music that he would only put out albums like only 7 years, because they had to be he was so obsessed with how this snare would hit or how this beat would hit or how this loop would hit. Like, I feel like we've lost this sense of what it means to be a craftsman in our society, because everything's instantaneous. So I think of it like, I'd love to talk to a strategist, I'd love to talk to a true craftsman, and I'd love to talk to an enigmatic and socially and emotionally effective leader. Those three.
That'd be a good dinner.
How about yourself?
Huh?
How about yourself? I'm going to turn it around.
How about myself, huh? That's a great one. I would have to go with Dr. Yuri Verstansky. I love the sports science side. My grandpa, who I've never got to meet, my dad's dad, so he passed away before I was born. I just hear he was a pretty interesting character. And then the other guy would be, I think, Lincoln. As many times as he failed and the first election he ever won was his presidency, and he lost about 7 elections before that, and just how he responded to failure and adversity. Like you said, he failed forward instead of, using it as a detriment. So I think those would be my 3.
Love it. Great answer.
Brett, well, I appreciate it, man. I know you're busy. I know you just came back from traveling. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing some great information today.
No, the honor's mine. Thanks for having me on.
Where can the listeners find you?
Yeah, the place I'm probably most active, and I know most people go to social media, I'm most active now on Instagram. And that goes into kind of what, right? Like, I'd be pretty, I think it'd be pretty ignorant of me to talk about engagement and then not give the why. I find that Twitter is super limiting, right? I used to love it a lot, and I'm probably still pretty active on Twitter. But you can't really give a whole lot of context, and 140 characters is a pretty poor way to communicate. Instagram, you can put up an image which immediately resonates with a theme or an idea, or conveys kind of more context behind what you're doing, and then you can give a caption. I find that Facebook is a little bit of a cesspool now, right? Like, it's always people just wanting to get in these rants. So Instagram, Twitter, @coach_Brett with 2 T's B. @coach_Brett B. You can find that again just by going to my website, bartholomewstrength.com. If you want to learn more about the book, consciouscoachingbook.com. So consciouscoachingbook.com. So all those places I try to be pretty active.
Do you prefer people to go to that website or Amazon? Does it not matter?
If they want to learn about the book, consciouscoachingbook.com is going to have a video explaining the why. It's going to have a lot more of the testimonials. Amazon is where you can order the book directly. Consciouscoachingbook.com has a link right to Amazon.
Awesome.
And all I'd say is, if you guys read the book, good, bad, or indifferent, please write a verified Amazon review. Amazon is very interesting in how they handle books on their site. And so you have to write reviews. It's really helpful. I want authentic reviews. So even if you think it sucks, 2 stars, please write a review. But you can find it on Amazon, and it's available on Kindle. So it should be easy enough.
Perfect, Brett. Hey, I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Join me in thanking today's guest, Brett Bartholomew, for delving into the details of his book, Conscious Coaching. And again, please go on to Amazon, pick up a copy of that book. You will not be disappointed. Also, some great information on how to pre-brief or how to talk to your athletes or set the tone and context for the training practice period. Also, how to debrief or how you should end sessions, again, to complete and cap off the context of the session and have the athletes walking away with something learned and something gained, or something they can take away for the 23 hours they'll be away from you until they come back to you. So a lot of great information how to coach. Just a wonderful episode again with Brett Bartholomew. So again, if you could go on social media of your choice, give Brett a shout out, give us a follow, and we really appreciate that. So again, we'll see you guys at our next episode of the Elite Performance Podcast.